Shall we go, team?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Brynanda, welcome to Wales. My name's Larry. I'm chair of the Wales Assembly of Women, an independent campaigning NGO. And I'm delighted to welcome you to our panel this afternoon that will look at the issue of remote working as seen in the pandemic and what it means for women. And the first thing to say is that remote working has made it much easier for us as an NGO to take part in the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, currently underway in New York and online. So there are some definite positives to take from remote working. But while there are good things that have emerged from better digital accessibility that we want to keep hold of, like being able to attend a meeting in New York, what are the issues that we need to keep an eye on? As a result of the pandemic, flexible working is an increasing priority for many of us, not just women. The road to change, however, is rarely linear, and it looks as if more men than women have returned to the office as restrictions have been removed. What does that mean for equality? That is why it is key we examine both the positive and negative impact of home working on all women through the lens of race, culture, religion, disability, sexuality, or socio-economic position. In particular, we need to identify how remote working could help or hinder women's share of care work in the home or their opportunities to progress at work. Here in the UK, a Bank of England policymaker recently warned that remote working can hinder women's progression at work. That view was echoed by former UK Prime Minister Theresa May at an International Women's Day discussion hosted by the Global Institute of Women's Leadership. Theresa May warned that flexible working could lead to women losing out in the workplace, as out of sight can mean out of mind. As governments across the globe seek to build back better post-COVID, ensuring the participation of all women in the economy and democratic processes is key to women's equality. Getting more women into decent work across all sectors, especially in leadership and decision-making roles, is critical to providing women with the tools to unlock their potential and build a fairer working future. The aim of our panel today here in Wales is to examine what extent remote working has or could punch some holes in the glass ceiling by opening up virtual doors that potentially offer more flexible and family-friendly ways of working. We will present and discuss recent research to help us identify what learning from the virtual working experience seen in the pandemic we need to keep hold of in Wales in order to ensure working practices change for the better. The title of our panel today is Opening Virtual Doors. Have changed working practices improved women's empowerment? And to help us unpick the data, I'm delighted to introduce our panel. Leah Hibbs, a lecturer in social sciences at Cardiff University, who has analysed the experiences of women local councillors in Wales, will examine how virtual meetings have increased participation of women in local government. And I'm delighted to say that Leah and her research have been making some headlines of their own this week, with Leah talking about her research on the BBC and Radio 4's Women's Hour. It is brilliant to see Leah's work getting the recognition it deserves. Leah will be followed by Dr. Jane Crode, an academic and consultant, who will reflect on how remote working could attract women, skilled women, to towns and small cities. The sharp-eyed among you will notice a late change to our panel. Leah and Jane will be joined by Jackie Jones, a barrister, academic and former member of the European Parliament, who is currently standing as a candidate in the forthcoming local government elections. And she will reflect on her experiences of the challenges and opportunities offered by better digital accessibility. I'm delighted that the panel will be chaired by Dr. Jane Salisbury, an honorary fellow at Cardiff University School of Social Sciences and coordinator of Wales Assembly's of Women's scheme to promote research on the lives of women in Wales, the Audrey Jones Awards for Research by Women. And just a reminder again, if I can just see Jane Fenton-May, we are recording, and the usual sort of, you can mute yourself, raise your hand to speak, put some questions and thoughts in the chat, and hopefully we can pick up as we go through. Welcome to our panel, and over to Jane.
Okay, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to this interesting and stimulating panel. I've seen some bits and bobs of it. We've had some pre-meets and we have some really interesting themes to explore through three voices that we're going to hear. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Leah. as I said, she's had some airtime this week, and our airwaves amongst the Wales Assembly Women Committee have been very positive. We're very proud of her, as she was a recipient of the 2020, I think, or was it 2019, Leah? 2020 Audrey Jones Award. And so we've watched her grow. She's almost ready for Viva, but she's already disseminating in learned journals. So fantastic. Leah, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for that, Jane. I will just share my screen with you all. Hopefully you can all see that. I will also spotlight myself for everyone, so you can only see my face. Yeah, thank you for that introduction. It's good to see you all today. Good to see a number of faces here, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you all a little bit more about my research that, as has been said, has been picked up this week in the media and in the news and on the radio. It was funny, I got the call on Monday asking if I'd be on the radio, and no one told me which radio it was, so I was expecting it to be a very low-key, perhaps Welsh radio station, and then I showed up the next morning and it was BBC Radio 4, which was a little bit of a shock. My presentation today, like Jane and Larry have said, we'll talk through some findings from my PhD research, which is obviously a wider piece of research into women local councillors in Wales. So in this presentation, I'll just give you a bit of a background, a bit of the context of the study. So why are we looking at Welsh local government? Why is it an interesting case, for example? I'll talk briefly through my methods, so what I did, who I spoke to, and then finally I'll talk through my findings. And these I've kind of divided into three main sort of categories for you today. So firstly, I'll talk about what I've found in terms of the triple duty. So that's the idea that women balance the political with the personal and the professional. And then I'll talk about the possibilities and perhaps glimmers of hope that we've seen from the pandemic, as well as some perhaps more sort of dissenting or doubting voices from my participants. So why Welsh local government? For those of you that don't know, Wales has a particularly rich history of women's political activity. It made headlines in 2003 for being the first legislature in the world to reach a 50-50 gender balance in the then called National Assembly for Wales, now Senedd Cymru. However, many had hoped that this success would cascade down to other levels of politics, as well as the kind of grassroots and professional side of women's representation. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. As of 2017, the last local government elections here in Wales, only 28% of our local representatives were women. And that figure itself very much veils and hides a great deal of disparity between councils. So we have some councils on the one hand which are doing comparatively well in terms of women's representation, reaching near parity levels with the highest around 43%. However, we've also got a very poor show at the other end of the scale, with other councils only having perhaps 10% of their councillors being women. Alongside this, only currently 6 of the 22 local authority leaders are women. And at the current rate of progress, which is about 1% increase every election cycle, it'll take us to the year 2106 before we've reached gender parity in Wales. So this shows that something needs to be done, and there must be reasons why local government in Wales is not perhaps as attractive to women politicians as it is in the Senedd, which, although we've had some kind of some fallback in terms of numbers in the Senedd, it still retains a very impressive gender balance. So my research, I wanted to find out what it was about being a local councillor that was made harder and what the barriers were for women. So I wanted to understand what it was like once you get in. A lot of research about women in politics focuses on the barriers before you get there, But what we often see is that women tend to drop off the ladder a little quicker than their male counterparts. So in order to do this, I chose a case study model. So I chose 4 councils, which have been anonymized here because of some of the nature of some of my other findings from the thesis, which focus more on, for example, experiences of sexism and sexual harassment. So the decision was made to anonymize. So you won't find out which councils or councillors I interviewed here, but it was an exemplifying case study design, which means that I chose councils which exemplified aspects that I wanted to know. So the councils were chosen based on their overall descriptive representations and the very numbers of women in their political legislatures. They were chosen because of the balance of women in senior positions, as well as where they were in Wales and whether they were maybe more rural or more urban councils. I then chose to do semi-structured elite interviews. I put elite in sort of quotation marks here because local government, whilst we might not consider it elite, women in local government are closer to the power and the policy making process than perhaps normal, your normal everyday citizen. Semi-structured interviews were chosen because they engender a better kind of relationship and rapport between interviewer and interviewee, and they also allow interviewees to expand on their answers to questions without being interrupted or without being curtailed by a very structured interview schedule. So from my 4 case study councils, this left me with a pool of 70 possible female councillors to interview. And one of the interesting or perhaps difficult things about my research was that COVID unfortunately hit halfway through my data collection. I had aimed for around 25 councillor interviewees. However, unfortunately with COVID and with some delays to research, I in the end did 19 interviews, 8 of which were completed or conducted online via means such as Zoom or Teams or even Skype for one interview. So I want to get on and talk a bit about my key findings from this. And one of the key themes that emerged from this research was the fact that we get a sense of presenteeism, which interacts with what I've called the triple duty. Now, by the triple duty, I mean the fact that women politicians, because of continued gendered caring roles and domestic roles, as well as the nature of local government, means that women politicians at the local level are often balancing both their personal, domestic and caring responsibilities, if they're looking after young children, for example, or older family members, balancing that with politics, but also alongside, if they're not retired, because of the poor remuneration at local government level, they're also likely to be balancing this with the professional. And by that I mean it's very common for local councillors in Wales and in the UK more widely to have a part-time job alongside being a councillor, and in some instances even a full-time job. Now, quite a few of my interviewees were very clear that they thought that local government was not set up in a way which meant that these women were welcome in politics, and that actually the organisation of local government meant that there were many barriers to women's participation. One of these key barriers has become termed as macho presenteeism, which is the idea that in order to be counted as being present, you have to be physically in the chamber, in the room, in order to take part. And as we can see, one of my participants, Marie, says here, she says, attendance levels are highly scrutinised, particularly by the opposition, so by the political opposition in the chamber. And they'll post on social media if you're missing meetings. There could be very good reasons why you're missing those meetings, you know, if your child is sick or whatever, but there's no mercy shown really when it comes to politics. So what we see there is we're seeing that we aren't getting, it's these kind of informal norms and values within local government, which are not set up in order to welcome women. more widely, there was a sense that local government does not have any real support structures for women facing this triple duty. So Rose at the bottom here says that the key point that she would like to make is that if her children, she did have children, but they were older, if they'd been dependent children, so younger children, it would have been extremely difficult because the structure, the systems and the processes do not enable that access for women who've got dependent children. So in our research, we often talk about these kind of formal norms, structures, practices, which can interact with more informal cultures and conventions, such as this macho presenteeism, to form barriers for women and to form barriers for women's participation. However, in my interviews pre-COVID, so the people that I interviewed pre-COVID, there was this sense that perhaps councils were missing one key technological solution. As we can see Fionn in the centre here, so she said, we desperately need to sort out remote attendance at meetings. She'd recently got a promotion or a job which took her to London, and she said, I could be sitting in my office in London and engaging in a meeting here. Similarly, Rose says that, it's the 21st century, we can engage with each other in other ways than having to have face-to-face meetings. She came to politics from a more kind of academic kind of background, and she said, I've experienced this in academia as well as the boards of multinational companies. They're not getting physically together in one place, they're using things like Skype. So that was a general sense in the interviews pre-COVID that councils were definitely missing out and not engaging with technological solutions. And there was a sense that engaging with these would mean that, for example, councillors wouldn't have to travel as far to get to council meetings. So Teresa on the left here says, because I have a job, like sometimes, sometimes I'm at work and I can't get out of that, or, I can't get back to my borough because I work quite far away. And Wales is quite interesting in the sense that quite a lot of the councils are perhaps in more rural areas. And the fact is that travelling to council meetings can often take 45 minutes to an hour each way. So what did we see from the interviews during COVID? Now, during COVID, local government moved everything online, so everyone was attending meetings remotely, a bit like we're doing now. And my participants that I interviewed during COVID were extremely positive about this. And there were some doubts, which I'll talk about in a second, but they were very supportive for a number of reasons. So we can see, for example, Marie here talks about those who can't get in due to childcare issues, who want to engage. So talking about how it could be an advantage to women and parents. However, we also saw different arguments. So Anne Garrett, for example, talking about reducing the carbon footprint, saying, she's one of these ones who were travelling up to an hour to get to her council chamber, and it's quite a trip. So she said that online meetings were working well. This was echoed by Alice at the bottom. So less travelling helps the environment, as well as work-life balance because you're not stuck in traffic. And Marley also echoed that, saying we need to think of the pollution, avoid cars trundling up and down roads, and you've got to account for people who work and for people with children and things like that. So the general sense that I got from my interviewees during these interviews when they were experiencing remote attendance in COVID was the sense that it opened doors, and it opened doors for a more diverse range of people to come into politics. So Nia here is talking about how it could mean that younger people being councillors could come in, and she said that would make a world of difference. And being able to attend from your laptop, perhaps in a break room at work, or on your sofa with your child next to you, and being able to maybe talk to them and cuddle them and give them a cooch, as well as attend a council meeting, was something that my participants saw generally as extremely positive. Now, there were some doubts. However, I will caveat this with saying that I was interviewing councillors at the time when council meetings were all online, so everyone was attending in a virtual format. So they perhaps hadn't yet experienced this kind of hybridity, which we hope to kind of employ in local government going forward. So Marie said that she was a little bit concerned that although there might be those kind of positives for people with children, it might become more isolating than inclusive. And I think we can probably very much all, you know, relate to that. And we've probably all felt at times throughout lockdowns and the pandemic that actually maybe we want to get back to face-to-face and we want to see people. However, I think the point here is that it would be a choice, and it would be a choice in terms of flexibility. You know, if your childcare fell through on the evening of a council meeting, you wouldn't have to forego your vote or forego your attendance, which is then used as political ammunition against you. You could just log into a laptop and attend virtually online. There were some other more serious doubts. So Jacqueline, who was an opposition councillor, had concerns that it was a little harder to be an opposition member if you were attending virtually. You know, she said very much that she found it frustrating at times. You can't make the same interventions that you might make face-to-face in a chamber. But she also said to me that she felt that sometimes politics is done outside of these formal meetings. And she said that she was worried we might miss out on kind of the more forthright chats that you can have in the members' room. As we can see in the bottom right here, this comment from Tara very much kind of sums up some of the doubts from my participants. So she said she thinks the only issue with this might be the hybrid. And again, they hadn't really fully explored this at this point. She said, we were having a meeting with several other members remotely on Skype. And because of where I sat at the meeting, they couldn't see me because they were focusing on the screen. So I think it's important that councils going forward are making sure that they are making sure that everyone is heard and gets their voices heard in a hybrid setting. However, I think generally out of all my participants, everyone was very positive about hybrid meetings and attending virtually in terms of it opening doors and breaking down barriers for women. Now, there is unfortunately a bit of a darker side to the online realm of politics. We've seen that politics and politicians are being asked to be more kind of visible and more vulnerable, and being more visible and accountable, which often leaves them more vulnerable. And the online abuse of politicians was something that was mentioned by a lot of my participants. You know, we can see Fionn here talking about how women politicians, she said, are much more susceptible to social media trolling, to hate comments. She'd suffered from it personally quite extensively, and she didn't want to detail what exactly had happened to her, but it'd been pretty horrendous, and actually she'd had to get the authorities and the police involved. Marie had experienced something similar, and the person that made the threat to her actually got sentenced to 3 months in prison. So these aren't just very small comments, these aren't just one-off trolls on Twitter or Facebook. You know, these are very much more serious threats and death threats and threats to women's lives. So I do think we need to be careful, and councils need to be careful going forward with the online applications of politics and how women are being treated both by constituents and by the wider public online and on these kind of social media pages. And we can see a kind of downplaying of this online violence against women in politics. So Teresa at the bottom says, oh, they just sent me a death threat. And that word just for me was quite interesting because it kind of downplays it. You know, you've been sent a death threat. But she was saying, you know, it's just annoying. You know, it was for a position that I held, but it was for a position that I didn't hold. And she felt the need to kind of clarify that that was from a woman and not a man. But we can see that women are getting so used to this online violence in politics that perhaps they are just downplaying it, and it's becoming something that's very much commonplace and to be expected. So to conclude, I think local councils going forward need to be engaging with technological solutions. I think local councils need to not slip back into this sort of in-person macho presenteeism, and I think we need to be careful about how we are engaging with online technologies and perhaps monitoring more the treatment of local councillors online. So thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any questions. I see there's kind of 6 things in the chat which I have to have a look at now. if you're interested in hearing more about my work, I have had a journal article published on this in the Journal for Cultural Research. You can follow me on Twitter, or you can drop me an email at the email link there. Thank you.
Leah, I think most of the things are things I put in about the meeting. So if anybody's got any questions, would you like to unmute and ask them, or stick your hand up?
Right.
I'll stop sharing maybe.
Yeah, thanks. Okay.
Oh, I think Gail's got her hand up.
Gail?
Gail Bradley, can you unmute and ask your question?
Oh. No, perhaps.
Melissa?
Well, mine's not really a question, and I'm not sure if this is appropriate. I can just share my experience if you want. I wrote that in the chat. The other thing I would add is also actually about getting elected. So, and once you're elected, is the campaigning. So I have a full-time job and children, and I've stood for MP and councillor. Yeah, I mean, it's just complete, it's just crazy, the timetable. So for example, I don't know if this is everywhere, but the main time for canvassing is 6 till 8, because that's the time that everybody's in. And it's also, and they like the fact that it's the time that mums are putting their kids to bed, because they know they'll be at home, you know, you can interrupt them. You know, and also every Saturday morning and Sunday mornings, and if you do anything like go to church or anything. So yeah, and then as you say, there's on top of that, there's the meetings and etc. etc. So yeah, I just to really agree with everything that you're saying, and my experience, and I was saying in the chat that my experience is that, you know, like most people are have got a job, and I worry sometimes is that if they don't have a job, that the ones that do have more time, they're maybe less engaged. Maybe it's because they're retired or something, and so they're not maybe quite at the coalface. And so are we getting a skewed, the people that are able to become MPs and councillors are maybe not necessarily the people that are on the front line that maybe know what's going on, you know, and really happening. Yes. So yeah, it wasn't really a question, it was just to say yes. Thank you, and I completely agree.
Very good.
Yeah, I think those are really interesting points. Yeah, and I didn't focus too much on the kind of getting in. It was kind of experiences once women were in, but I think that's definitely something I want to go and have a look more in depth at in the future. And yeah, I mean, in Wales, it's you know, there's an overrepresentation of retired people in local government. You know, I think it's something like 37%, which compared to the general population is, you know, a huge overrepresentation of retired people. And the majority of the women that I spoke to were older, and were, you know, retiring and in receipt of their pension. And that's another key thing as well, because, you know, you have to be able to build up a pension and have another income alongside. You know, being a local councillor does not, you're not paying into a pension scheme unless you're paying into, you know, like a lifetime ISA or something. So that's another consideration. Are there any other questions?
I could ask one. Yeah. Can you hear me, Leah? Yeah. Right. No, I was very much interested in the ways in which ICT, remote working, alters relationships. And we all know that there used to be an A-level sociology question: work is much more than a job, discuss and illustrate with reference to Weber, Marx, social interactionism. Work is much more than a job, and one of the things we all know is relationships happen at work, affairs happen at work, research groups cluster and so on. And I think the face-to-face encounter at the coffee machine or at lunch over sandwiches or in a research group talk, those things aren't happening, because we're all looking at these lovely little windows of each other, you know, with lovely backgrounds and pretty blouses and so on. So our identity work is we don't have the same affordance for actually those face-to-face, you know, human encounters, opportunistic moments. I wondered what you thought about that. In terms of, you are an academic, you are in a university school of social science. What are your thoughts about that? Apart from the counsellors, what do you think could happen to make things better in terms of opportunities, other than, you know, hybridity?
Yeah, I think, you know, from my own experience of doing a PhD throughout the lockdowns, had I not had me and some friends not made the effort to meet up online and write together online virtually, it would have been an incredibly lonely two years. I think, you know, with regards to local government, and, you know, that was mentioned by my participants, that it could be quite isolating. But I think it's, you know, we're not saying that everyone's going to attend every meeting online. I think it's just having that safety net, isn't it? It's just, you know, it's if the childcare falls through, you don't have to panic and suddenly not attend a meeting. You know, you can just let someone know and you can attend virtually, and they know to let you in virtually. I think, you know, in terms of more widely in academia, we've shifted back to face-to-face delivery of everything now. Which has its merits, and also I think sometimes online attendance can actually be beneficial. I taught classes through lockdown for people returning to education, and I had people attending my courses from Leeds, attending from North Wales, attending from all over the UK, who wouldn't otherwise have been able to participate in these courses, because usually they take place, you know, in the city centre in Cardiff. So I think there are some benefits to conducting some stuff online, but I do think we need to be careful that perhaps women aren't losing out in terms of, you know, being maybe disadvantaged, because they are more likely with those kind of traditional caring roles. They are more likely to be at home looking after children, for example.
When you were talking about the triple duty, I was thinking about not recent stuff in the 70s, Sue Sharp, Double Identity, The Lives of Working Wives, The Juggling, Hannah Gavron, Captive Wife. And I was thinking, there's time for a new book, Leah, postdoctoral book for you, to concentrate on hybridity, remote working, and holding a mirror up to the new kinds of practices and what that means. I'm going to abuse my chair's role here and say I observed a council meeting for political reasons recently and was absolutely shocked by what I saw. People just left. The part of the bit I was interested in for the vote, people had already gone away, you know, and the actual demographic also was worrying to me, exactly what you sort of hinted at. And so to have young, feisty women in careers, possibly mothering as well, you know, absolutely engaged and at the sharp end of things is heartening to me. So I'll shut up. But is anybody else?
Gail's got her hand up again.
Okay.
Gail, do you want to ask your question now?
Okay. It's actually comments, really. I think it's vital for democracy that we do try and engage younger people. I'm in my mid to late 70s, and I think it's really sad that we don't accommodate in so many walks of life opportunities for the younger person to get involved, because it is about a greater democracy. The other point I was going to make is I recognize that this is very based on social sciences, but I do worry about the health of women when they're trying to juggle all these things, and working remotely does throw that in. I'm really enjoying the discussion. It's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you. Super. Excellent.
Yeah, I obviously I agree that you know, getting younger people in, and not just women, you know, that's the point I do want to make as well, is that these virtual tools are useful for all counsellors, you know, all young counsellors with other responsibilities, and if they've got working lives and younger children, you know, male counsellors as well. So yeah, I think we do need to see, you know, a shift away from what we might call the male, pale and stale nature of local government in Wales. Also the grey men in grey suits, I think, is another term used. So yeah, but yeah, I think, you know, reflections on you know, health issues as well as, and you know, I think, you know, there's one side of it saying that virtual meetings can be beneficial, people with access issues, for example. I know that my own mother, who, she won't mind me saying this, she suffers from a kind of neurological condition, and she's worked from home for over a decade and a half now, and she's always faced resistance to that, and she's always faced managers trying to get her back into the office when it just isn't possible for her. And now with COVID, they've suddenly shut up. they've suddenly realized, actually no, it's fine, you know, you're still working from home. So I think, you know, I think it has reduced the stigma perhaps for those who already were home working. You know, there's always questions about your productivity out there, you know, is she working, or is she just going and taking the washing out and putting it on the line, or, you know, is she just moving the mouse every 10 minutes? And I think everyone working from home perhaps might have had a role in reducing that stigma.
Yeah, thank you, Lee.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much, Leah. That was really interesting, and a good wide-angled look at affordances, negatives, positives, and so on. Thank you. Okay, well, it gives me great pleasure to invite our next speaker, Jane Crode, Dr. Jane Crode, who is a member of the Wales Assembly of Women and a former academic at Cardiff Metropolitan, where she still is involved with some dissertation work, but she's a consultant, and she's particularly passionate about attracting skilled people to cities and women to cities. And she's going to talk and draw on some of her doctoral work and more recent sort of visioning from consultancy work. And Jane, I'm going to hand over to you. Dr. Crode, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Jane.
Welcome. Thank you. Over to you.
So, hello to everybody. Welcome. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you about my research. My research is from the point of view of informing policy. So it's connected very closely with Leah's excellent work. My research initially was about attracting skilled people, both genders, to small cities in order to drive the social and economic development of small cities. In the UK, we are dominated by London, and that domination is unhealthy throughout the country, really. So what my research was focusing on the other cities and towns in the UK, and how to attract and retain skilled people who can drive the economy in those other locations in the UK other than London. So as we know, the kind of devastation of the pandemic has changed completely the kind of outlook for so many of us throughout social and our economic lives. So a lot of the research that I did initially was a combination of qualitative and quantitative research, and the combination gave me a picture that allowed me to develop this model, which kind of looks at the main issues with regarding attracting and retaining skilled people in small cities and towns. So the main constituents of the model are that leadership is of paramount importance. Without leadership, so without the people that Leah are talking about in the political viewpoint, but also the other stakeholders involved in leadership, without good leadership in those small towns and cities, then really they don't have a chance of developing social and economic development. Then the main two other things, obviously each city and town depends on their history, their strengths, their location, etc. And those are immovable. So the things that I focused on in my research were attraction motivators. So finding the key items that the policymakers must focus on developing successfully in order for the cities to develop socially and economically. And those 5 attraction motivators that are essential for social and economic development are employment, but not only employment, but careers. So allowing the progress of careers in those towns and cities, that's what attracts people, because they won't really be attracted to stay or to move to a town or a city unless they have a vision of how they can progress their careers. So the next important thing I found was social life. And this is really important for skilled people, not only because they enjoy mixing and being with kind of like-minded people and finding opportunities for social life with friends and colleagues. The other important thing about social life is networking. So networking outside those close friends and families is really important, both for personal development and, as somebody mentioned, well-being and health, but also it's the key for increasing your prospects with regards to careers. So finding different opportunities and being introduced to different areas. The third attraction motivator is infrastructure, and that's both the built physical infrastructure, road, rail, air, which both genders have equal opportunities of accessing, and also the digital and technological infrastructure. Now, this in my research initially, the digital technology is really important for infrastructure, because actually the small cities and towns are equally, if not better, at providing good access to digital technology than London or the mega cities. So that's a really focus point for these smaller cities. The fourth is the cultural. This is high culture and such as opera, art, theatre, music and sports, and also social culture. So how people feel about the place they're living. So how welcoming it is and how inclusive it is. And the final thing is family, which is sometimes overlooked in policy because it's quite difficult to make policy around family. But the kind of policy that we're looking at is enabling family, if they want to stay together, to allow them to have affordability of housing, easy access around the city, in order that families can connect and have and realise the support and familiarity that is the benefits of family connections. So first of all, looking at employment. So what I've looked at is looking at all those attraction motivators individually to find out what, comparing them pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Obviously the post-pandemic, or we're not post-pandemic, but that's kind of the term we're using as we're coming to the end, hopefully in the UK, of the pandemic. We're looking at what is the extant evidence at the moment. We're still obviously looking at it, and it will change greatly, but having a kind of image, just as we are, of so policymakers can look at taking advantage of any positives they can in helping and supporting women, either in areas that they are going to be worse off because of the pandemic, and also building on the opportunities that have arisen due to the pandemic. So first of all, in employment. So to attract women specifically, and men, but women in this case, then you need career progress. And in fact, pre-pandemic, it was found in lots of research, it was found that it was identified that women, especially married
Jane, you've muted us. There we are.
Okay, is that, sorry, I don't know what happened there. So can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And obviously with virtual working, it gives the opportunity so people can have career progress. So from a personal perspective, a very close friend of mine has been works for a company that is international and has been asked annually to take the next kind of level up directorship, but with an American company, and she's turned it down because of family commitments. But in the last couple of months, she's actually taken this opportunity because now in America, they don't see it the problem, her remaining in the UK and just going over to America maybe 2 or 3 times a year. So there are actual examples of women being able to take career leaps, even though, and still stay with their family commitments of children and parents. The other attraction motivator, social life. So networking with colleagues, friends, and outside the close circle of family and friends. This may be playing golf, it may be going out drinking, it may be going to a party. It may, it's anything that groups of people get together. And the focus here is on groups of people getting together that are outside your very close circle of family and friends. And in the pandemic, of course, men nor women have been able to socialise, apart from with family or in our bubbles. Before the pandemic, there's been considerable research identifying that men have many more opportunities to network outside their family and close friends, which provides those opportunities that get them up that career ladder. Post-pandemic, obviously all socialising stopped, but there is some research, some identified that actually women using social media and those sorts of socialising and increasing their network using social media of LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram actually is allowing them to join more groups, to find a bigger social group that is introducing them more to these opportunities. This is an area where a lot more research is needed, and hopefully is somewhere where women can build on their social networks and take advantage of the opportunities to improve their careers and also improve their kind of well-being, to look outside the group that is very close to them. The other thing, infrastructure. So pre-pandemic, women, we're looking at the built infrastructure, and we're also looking at the technological infrastructure. And although men and women generally with the built infrastructure are quite equal, in research that I did find that in fact women often didn't have the choice of maybe cycling to work or maybe catching public transport, because often their commute to work wasn't straightforward. It wasn't just from the house to work. It often involved either dropping off children to school or picking up the children up, or maybe having to do some task on the way in, or maybe drop food into their mother, or so often they had little less choice other than having a car in order that they could make a kind of complex route to do jobs on the way to and from work. So it means post-pandemic, if you're doing things virtually, it means that you do have some more equality, in that if both men and women are working virtually, then the difference between having to do these extra little jobs on the way or on the way home from work aren't included, which again may be an area that is quite positive with regards to women's development in their career and their mental well-being and their overall quality of life. I mean, the evidence is, there's little evidence and there's nothing in depth and detailed at the present, but there is an indication that women post-pandemic have been much more likely to embrace the technology that has developed. So even though, a lot of women pre-pandemic were a bit reticent to adopt technology, much more reticent than men to adopt technology, and be early takers up of the technology. But having all been forced to use all this technology, then women have overcome the barriers. They've often spent more, they've started to spend more money on accessing technology, and hopefully that will develop further. Again, that's another area for further research, but also something that should be supported by policymakers to improve equality for women. Culture. So this is obviously including both high cultures, that opera, art, theatre, music, and also social culture. So the feeling of whether you feel safe in a city, whether you feel welcome, whether you feel included. So pre-pandemic, some cities were more welcoming than others, I found. So in cities that tended to be more focused on the theatre, music, art, had a less macho atmosphere, and women felt safer there and were more and felt more included and were more likely to socialise and want to stay in those sorts of cities. Post-pandemic, there's little evidence of change. So generally, the sporting culture in Wales is very strong, and also post-pandemic, the sports area has been the quickest to recover, much quicker than the high cultures thing. So, you know, opera, theatre, art, and music venues, they still are finding it quite difficult to support, economically support audiences. So again, an area, there's very little evidence apart from observational, so further research is needed here. And also with regard to policy, there are two areas of policy that need to be looked at here. So one is encouraging women to be more engaged in sports, maybe, and to encourage them to feel more included in that area, and also to support more the culture that women find more inclusive and welcoming. So the opportunities. So I would say from the overall perspective for cities and towns, what's needed is for policies to be adopted to empower women and build on the benefits that we've identified post-pandemic. But the other thing, and Leah kind of touched on it, and we touched on it in the questions, we must ensure that women avoid exploitation. So when we're looking at employment, women can now work virtually, but there are two issues with that. There is quite a lot of evidence with regard to, and Larry touched on it, if you're not present, then you get forgotten. So you get forgotten on the career ladder. So although, and it may be, and lots of women find it very, very convenient to work from home, but that may not always make it has to be ensured that policies both in businesses and also policies that are made by government have to ensure that women have the opportunity to still, you know, be supported in their careers, even if they are working virtually. The other thing is self-exploitation. So women do, quite a lot of women do multitask. So they're able to put the washing on, go and help mum, go and do the shopping, collect the kids. You know, lots of us working women do a lot of things and quite enjoy it, quite embrace it. But we do sometimes kind of self-exploit. And with this extra time we have, you know, sometimes and we're talking about well-being and mental health, sometimes it is, you know, from a personal point of view, I used to find an hour commute sometimes quite releasing, because it was the only time I could actually think about planning what I wanted to do, or just think about nothing and not be doing anything apart from looking at the road. And those kind of hours of commute, or sitting on the train and maybe reading a book, or just thinking about nothing, you know, we must be aware that we, you know, every extra minute that we have because we can work virtually need not be taken up with things that we can do for others. Because I think that sometimes is what we're guilty of. Not all of us, but some of us. So those are, I mean, it's still, you know, I think we all agree the jury's out, and there are lots of unknowns, but also lots of opportunities that we must bring to the attention of how decision makers and policy makers can build on those opportunities.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
These are my references.
Okay. Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much. Are there, before I abuse my chair's right, are there any questions that have emerged as Jane was reflecting on her doctoral work and bringing it into pandemic, and whether those attraction motivators are still fit, and looking through the lens of pre and post pandemic? Any questions emerging in the consciousnesses of the audience, please?
I think Gerda's got a question.
Great. Gerda, over to you.
You're muted, Gerda.
Muted. There we are. Fine. Okay, and it's not. Thank you, Jane. That was brilliant. I enjoyed it. What I'm anxious about is that the fact that during the pandemic, women have been working 80-hour weeks, schooling children, doing the home stuff, avoiding getting COVID, and doing the homework. Okay, so I mean, is there any research being conducted into that? And the other factor is that there was a huge increase in violence to women. And again, so, you know, this is lovely. We're talking about how things to get moving, but I don't know in what capacity are we aiming to research ways that can support women working at home, and how are we addressing the issues of exhaustion and so forth. I mean, are there more single parent families now? Do we know?
No, I mean, that's not my area of expertise, but I think this is the thing, is that looking at policies that support the opportunities for women, but also in that research, obviously we have to make sure that we use this time to make sure that women are more empowered rather than less, which I think, you know, this self-exploitation is to an extent that, and just general exploitation, of working 80 hours a week, you know, always being available, that's the issue. And I think it was mentioned by Larry. So I mean, I think we all agree that there needs to be a huge amount of research now, because we are really looking at very, very different times. Post-COVID is a very different situation.
Yeah, I think perhaps that's more, it's like, you know, are we able as a group of women to suggest areas of policy that need to be addressed?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gerda. That was a very powerful question, really. There is work ongoing about the experience of women in COVID times. My understanding, both genders actually, some qualitative diary work being done out of Swansea University by somebody that was at Cardiff. And if you could remember Victoria Wood in that marvellous production, Diary of Housewife number 43, it was archival stuff kept during the war, and they dramatised it, and Victoria Wood took part. I think there's that kind of work being logged. And I don't know if Gerda was attending in the earlier session, but this notion of the triple duty or the double shift, it's notorious that women are, as Jane said, quite delighted to be able to be in the game of a checkered career trajectory, but working hideous hours. And there was some good journalism in The Guardian and Independent during the first few lockdowns, that the biggest burden was falling on women, as you say, you yourself were doing story time to little tiny tots in the Middle East, you know, and the burden of hyperconnectedness and always on, always doing was largely borne by women. But there is some qualitative work going on. Apart from the domestic violence, Jackie, our next speaker, might want to respond to your question, Gerda, about the monitoring and the monitoring of violence against women during the lockdown. Jackie, are you able to contribute anything that you know from your positioning on that?
Yeah,
Jackie
sure.
Jones.
Hello,
you.
everyone from my virtual beach. Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits, I think,
Yes.
having a nice background with a not so nice subject. I don't think that I made a note of that to come to it at the end of disadvantages. But the virtual space has, for a very, very long time, ever since it's existed, been a problematic space for women, especially young women, and younger and younger and younger. So this is not a new phenomena in terms of violence we're talking about, yeah? So that's not new. Sexting, revenge porn, and all of these other things that proliferate now on the internet. And the mechanism has changed. Sorry, the cat's going to jump on the computer now. He's just moved. He's been here the whole time asleep. Isn't that virtual workspaces? So that's nothing new. It's the responses that lawmakers have to make. With respect, this Tory government is very slow to do things around ending violence against women and girls, anything new at all. It hasn't come out with a strategy in quite a while. It's due any minute, they tell us, but I'm not sure whether that's the case at all. You did mention domestic violence or domestic abuse being slightly wider than domestic violence, encompassing men as well as women too, and that's gone through the roof. And I mean, we know this, right, on this call, that it's been increasing to a very large extent. And we've got the Domestic Violence Act, finally, after many, many years of pushing for it from all sorts of political parties and activists, of course. It doesn't necessarily help with, in my view, to get rid of the stereotypes, because we are talking in stereotypes a lot today. Yes. About women looking after children and the triple duty, etc. And I think that is a fact of life, but it's unhelpful to progress society along. So taking a back seat from taking care of children is really important for women to do, and stepping into their power, because it is power that they have, not to do the usual things that are associated with being a good housewife or being, you know, a dual breadwinner model type of household, and saying, well, no, I'm on a virtual call, you take care of whatever it is. Might not be children at all, might be the dog or the cat, you know, might be something else. And stepping into that power and women taking responsibility, which sounds really harsh on my part, but I think that needs to be, you know, pushed a lot more now. Do you want me to stop there? Because I could go on and on.
Yeah,
and on.
But I wanted to bring you in response to Gerda's question.
Yeah, did I answer it?
Yes, you did.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And then I wanted to come back to Jane, and then I will introduce you, Jackie. So Jane, Gerda's question to Jane Crode, onto us collectively as Wales Assembly of Women, I think, because Gerda was using the collective we. What are we doing? And thank you, Jackie, that was helpful. Any more thoughts about Jane's presentation? And she talked about opportunity release, and you mentioned that women are getting much more wired in now, and that there is a game that women can schmooze. People schmooze on the networks as well, don't they? But there's a piece of work going back, Jane, by Rosemary Compton called, and she had a concept of women's bimodal employment patterns that nestled around family life. Terry Rees used to refer to Rosemary Compton's work on bimodal trajectories for women. And the word career is usually now accompanied with career trajectory, and they are postmodern. their patriot, their timeout, their stop the clock, and so on. And I found what you were saying about the attraction motivators and thinking about women's career trajectories and how there might be, provided they don't overburden themselves, and as you say at the end, new trajectories that are made possible as an outcome of the pandemic. So that just, so Rose, I'll email you the reference, Jane, because it might be useful if you scholar up something around this from your doctoral work and consultancy work. Any other questions for Jane?
Sorry, can I just come in? Gail's got a question or comment, but can I come in? And I was going to ask about street violence, and did you do any look at that in relation to people coming into things? And I wanted to bring up the fact that the Welsh Assembly government, which is a Labour government, has got its new strategy, and one of the issues they want to look at is violence in the work and abuse in the workplace and on the street. So we're hoping that they will come up with some positive solutions and maybe some funding to help make sure this happens. So I won't go on anymore, but can you let Gail have a comment, please?
Yeah, Gail, come in, Gail.
Hang on.
And then,
can you hear me? Right.
Yes, we can.
During lockdown, I've been online on courses a lot because I have the benefit of being retired. One of the things that I'm really concerned about is whether the policymakers are looking at what future employment is going to look like for women. I'm thinking particularly of things like artificial intelligence affecting the legal profession, and many women choosing to look at law perhaps, what robots are going to mean for the caring professions, heaven forbid, but research has shown that where they're using robots, the people who are being cared for actually quite enjoy it, and it shouldn't necessarily replace social interaction. But I'm just wondering if we are equipping young women and girls to go into a world that's going to be very different from the one that we're in at the moment, and very quickly. The changes are coming quickly in the crypto world, in the DeFi world, all these things. Yeah. So I just wondered if there was any thought being given in the policy areas in this, Jane?
Well, not directly, Gail, but bringing in Jackie's comments and yours, I think, so it's about policy makers understanding that post-pandemic, we will need a lot more training. So as Jackie commented, you know, the de facto pre-pandemic was that women looked after children and were responsible for most of the caring and housework. So, and you know, so if we could have more training from, you know, at school level, you know, what we need is research into the most effective way of actually not just carrying on with this gender bias. Now we will have this extra time with virtual working and things. I just think it is now a time for, as you say, you've enjoyed doing lots of training online. You know, it is much more effective now for doing training and courses online. You know, in schools and things, you can do more training. I think we probably all understand that learning new skills is really important, and it is a new time, and policymakers must now through research, take the information and develop and commit to new training and new skills, and that's life skills, health skills, you know, mental health skills, and equality and inclusivity skills, and you know that so it's about more training.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. We're going to, that was excellent. Thank you, Gail, wherever you are. We'd welcome you to join the Wales Assembly of Women. Gerda is already a member, but we like thinking women and people who are aware of the policy agenda. Jane, thank you so much. I'm going to now welcome Jackie Jones. who is well known to us, former chair of Wales Assembly of Women, our MEP for Europe. She was hyperactive on when she was the minister in European Parliament. Her Facebook was buzzing, and when we had a little informal chat the other couple of nights ago, we talked about the affordances of remote working and getting out there, getting messages out there when Jackie was her MEP. But Jackie, I'm just going to hand over to you, and it's great that you've joined us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today on the virtual platform and CSW. CSW is such an important process, 2 weeks of women talking to each other, mostly women talking to each other about issues that are so relevant to all of us, and for us to fundamentally shift society and step into our power and make that happen. So it's really important that we keep on with CSW, and Wales Assembly of Women has special status at the United Nations, and that's really, really important to bring those rights and bring those influences back to Wales as well, and to individual women. So thank you very much for letting me step in at the last minute.
Thank you.
Really, thank you. May I start by just commenting on the last question, if that's okay?
Yes,
We're going out of
the floor is yours, Jackie. The floor is yours.
I would suggest that social engineering of how different this generation, i.e. under 60, let's say, does work, has been going on for quite a long time. Because the younger generation, i.e. those, let's say, 30 and below, or 25 or 20, I don't mind what the cutoff is, have been used to working, if you like, online for a very long time now, because they are always on the laptops. And I don't mean it in a negative sense, it just is part of life. They've been playing games online. And my son is 20 years old. He did his A-levels online. He was hit by COVID, went to university, all online virtual classrooms. So in a way, they're already used to that. On top of that, you mentioned AI. When I was in the European Parliament, we had experts come in, this was in 2019, we had experts come in, talk about AI and the gender effect of AI. AI is not set up for women at all. It's not set up for race. It's not set up for age or ability or disability. So a lot of work needs to go into AI laws. So watch this space. AI is really, really important, where we're going to have future battles if we're not careful, if we don't bake it in straight away. Younger generations are also used to being platform workers. So platform worker is getting your jobs through the computer. So I'm pointing at you, so the computer or the laptop or the phone. And what that means is the employment relationship is shifting very dramatically to, if you like, agency work. And we saw that with P&O ferries just last week, yeah. Unfortunately, just diabolical. The CEO saying he knows he's breaching the law, but doesn't care. So we're going to have a shift in that. Agency work, 0 hours contracts. These things have not gone away. So the way we do work is shifting anyway. So trade unions are very late to the party on all this as well, most trade unions, and I do blame them quite a lot. I'm a member of 2 trade unions at the moment, but they are very late to the party. So I'll just leave it there because I haven't got enough time to talk about other things. But one other final thing I want to say is that the management style that has been au rigueur in the UK is command and control model, and that means that you are at the office, you prove that you're at the office, and therefore you're seen to be doing your work, regardless of you're actually doing your work. And that it's not helpful for women, and that needs to shift. What the digital space does is shift that slightly. Now, there's a bit about security and about overseeing work, etc., that needs to be ironed out, and that's one of the spaces that the trade union has to come up with and has to really be very forthright about. Otherwise, we'll have monitoring and CCTV at home, and that's not good. So those are just comments on the world of work, because I'm also at Bristol University doing the social reproduction and this kind of research as well. So now the dogs come and joined me on the couch. When I was, I stood for elections in local council election 2017. Nothing digital really to talk about, a bit of Facebook, but that's about it. I stood in Preseli, Pembrokeshire in 2019 in the Senate elections, and I was elected MEP in 2019, and I'm standing in local council elections. And lots of things for the last two elections in particular are the virtual space that you need in order to win voters over, because your comms are so essential. If I can start with the Preseli elections, because it occurred to me while I was sat here that this is directly relevant to our topic. So in the Senate elections, I was selected in December 2019. No, that's not right. In 2020, yeah, December 2020, and in Preseli, Pembrokeshire. But I was sat in Cardiff. So the selection meeting was online and I was selected. I couldn't get to Preseli, Pembrokeshire until March because I was not allowed to because of the COVID rules. So I had to use the virtual space. Yeah. It was absolutely essential because why would people vote for me? They don't know me necessarily, apart from the family. I've got lots of family down there because my dad's from there, right? Got family connection. But still, you have to use the virtual space to fill those gaps, fill that space, fill that history, fill that time as well. When I eventually got down to Preseli, Pembrokeshire at the end of March 2021, yeah, I've lost track of days. That's the other thing, isn't it? Then, no, it must have been, where are we? Yeah, it must have been 20. So December 2020, I got selected, and then the elections were in May 2021. So I got down there in March 2021. And the hustings were all online because you weren't allowed because of the restrictions of COVID. Right. Now, of course, these things will go. And as of Monday, we've got lesser restrictions again. But I would suggest to you, a big county like Preseli, Pembrokeshire, having online hustings, it's much more accessible for everyone, not just the candidates, but for everyone. And the first thing then is that those political parties that don't have as much money, or candidates who don't have as much money, i.e. independents, for example, they will have better opportunities to stand and to be represented in the political system, I would suggest, than others who have that financial backing, for example, Russian money or trade union money or whatever. You know, that's just a joke, right? Yeah, okay, just a joke, just keeping it light. Yeah, okay. So I think that's something to think about as well. Yeah, so I'll leave it there for Preseli, but if you've got any questions there, then that would be great. So then when it comes to being an MEP, I would suggest the space, time and history was different anyway. Mm. Now this is pre-COVID, of course, right? So we'll just keep COVID out of it. During COVID, the European Parliament was one of the first parliaments to go hybrid and voting, etc. So just park that to one side for a minute. But because I had 3 offices at least, Strasbourg, Brussels, and in Cardiff, and of course my own home in Cardiff as well. But my constituency sounds very grand, but it was Wales. So yeah. To get around Wales it's just not possible, right? So the virtual aspect of it would have been fantastic, or would be fantastic, if you have a huge constituency, same as Preseli, which is obviously not as big as Wales. But when I was, this was 2019 to 2020, I was only there 8-9 months. Working virtually was absolutely vitally important, especially communicating with staff. Now this won't be anything new, but it was intensified because you were constantly traveling, 4 days in Brussels or Strasbourg, and then 3 days in Cardiff. But in between you were traveling at least 1 or 2 days. So it was really challenging. So having access to a laptop, a phone, anything digital was vitally important in order to do the work. You can't just print off hundreds of pieces of paper to read through. It was absolutely impossible. So the virtual space then, and the timing of it is rather important, because you were constantly doing small videos, constantly on the radio, television, Twitter, TikTok, you know, you name it. And we also did interviews with our fellow MEPs. So we will be asked, and you maybe do it in another language as well. So this digital working was quite a normal way of dealing with the difficulties of time and space while being in the Parliament. By the way, they hire a whole train to take everyone from Brussels down to Strasbourg, the staff, and back again. The actual train itself is just Parliament, European Parliament employees. Since I've been no longer an MEP, sadly, the virtual space, I've still got some time, I think, has been very vitally important to keep my ties together with the roles that I've been given very kindly by the Labour Party. If you hadn't guessed, I'm a Labour Party member. And that is that I am United Kingdom Labour representative to what is called PES Women. So that's the Party of European Socialists Women's Organisation branch. So all across the European continent, it's not just the European Union, otherwise I wouldn't be part of it, they're meeting. We usually meet in Brussels, but because of the virtual space, you can meet online. And that's really important because I'm sat in Cardiff and I would have to pay for it. The party's supposed to pay for it, but anyway, let's not go there. Then as a former member of the European Parliament, I'm in an association of those former parliamentarians with lots and lots of other people from other parties all across the European Union. And we get to have the virtual classroom and to have conferences online. So for example, I had a virtual classroom in India and one in Toronto. Sorry. See if I can get this up. That's one of the problems, isn't it, of working virtually, having it on there. We also had an opportunity to talk to every 6 months, the presidency of the European Union moves around different countries, member states. So as a former member of in the association, we have an opportunity to meet with presidents, vice presidents, prime ministers, etc., who hold the presidency of the European Union to try and influence policy that way, because we are former members. Wouldn't be able to do that if it was all in person, because there's no way I can travel to Paris and Czech Republic, etc., because that's prohibitive financially. So when you look at the spaces occupied in the European Parliament, the gender balance and racial balance and ability balance is much, much better than it is in the UK Parliament, for example. It's on a par with the Welsh Parliament, apart from race, of course. We're quite a few people who have a disability. So it's really essential to have that. Now, I'm also chair of my local Labour Party, and chairing virtual meetings is quite a challenge, I can tell you, because people are trying to unmute, mute, do all sorts of things, try and keep them to time, but not be rude. They're on WhatsApp groups, talking to each other, laughing and joking, or you know something's coming because you can see it in the chat box, keeping track of who said what and everything, and keeping to the agenda items. I think is much harder online than it is in person, personally. But that's a matter of the person who's actually chairing as well. And then finally, I want to give some reflections, if I still have some time.
Yeah, you've got 2 minutes.
Okay, about working as a lecturer or professor beforehand, because I was disciplined before because you had to, as a lecturer, do your work at home, usually, or in an office, and then you go into the space where the students are and give your lecture or seminar or your research paper. So I was already in the mindset of my time, I have to organize that myself. And that is a huge benefit, because if you aren't in that mindset, if you think, right, I'll go to work and I'll do my work and then I'll come back. I'm not saying anyone on the call here is, but it's a different mindset from going into work, already having a different spaces and times. There's a lot of internet reliance, which is a downside. Never switching off Twitter. I just don't switch off on Instagram. There's big echo chambers, and the stereotypes persist as well. I don't think that's necessarily helpful at all. So the dual breadwinner model, where women are doing all the caring responsibilities. I think, though, that we have to figure out a workplace fit for the 21st century that doesn't affect our mental health so much. that we don't want to work there anymore, or we want to go to Preseli, Pembrokeshire for permanently, which isn't really a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
But I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you very much. That's great. Jackie, there's a very interesting question in the chat box from Leah, who's, you know, problematized and imagined something that might be happening. Leah, would you like to say the question yourself?
Yeah, I can do. I just typed
Thank
it.
you.
I forgot it. Yeah, so my question is, do you think there might be a kind of concern perhaps by the general public or kind of constituents that this digital turn in politics could lead to more politicians being parachuted in by political parties? So, you know, politicians who don't live in the area standing for, you know, for positions where they don't live, and also perhaps not being as present on the ground or in the local area, because I know we saw a shift in terms of, you know, MPs kind of local surgeries to moving into the virtual. So that, you know, that could easily mean that MPs just live in a flat in London, or, you know, and don't actually kind of return to their constituency. And obviously that could be used as political ammunition, both in elections and chambers. You can see the headlines now, can't you?
Yeah. What's Jackie's thought on that?
I don't know about more, because I think it happens quite often now with certain political parties more than others, but and it's also a gender thing, I think. That there's a gender perspective here. I think if I had been elected in Preseli as an MP, for example, and had to go to London every week, that's quite a hard journey. Not equivalent to going to Strasbourg or anything, but it's still quite a difficult challenge. The type of personality that I am, I would always go. It just is. But there are people who, even if they're in London, wouldn't go. So I don't think necessarily would be more. It would just parachuting in certain people for secure seats or safe seats has always happened.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to be any more, but who knows?
Okay, thank you, Jackie. I think we're almost out of time, and I wanted to say what a splendid discussion we've had, and it's been very organic, and each speaker has given us plenty to think about, and it's been marvellous to have Jackie, our former chair of Wales Assembly of Women, back as a guest speaker, reflecting on the hyper eventful life, Jackie. I mean, talk about always on, always connected. That was a phrase we coined in hyper professionality paper I wrote with Lynn Gornall. Always on, always connected, with some of the disadvantages as well of exhaustion. But Larry is our chair. Larry, would you like to say the final sentence about this afternoon? Is she there? Or is she gone? I can't.
Classic. On mute. Maybe that is the classic way to end a conference, you know, a session, looking at the pros and cons of remote working and what it means for women. I would like to add that it was lovely to have the energy of Jackie there in the end, and the real examples of what it's like at the coalface. So wonderful. Thank you very much to everybody for coming and joining us. Thank you to everyone.
Yeah.
Keep up with us on our website, and look out for the AJ Awards. They'll be coming back soon, and we'll be looking for yet more wonderful work.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye.